So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to another battle on one of the large set-piece maps that was added in the more recent new patch. This one's theme is a little bit more chaotic, but there kind of is one as we'll go through. It's kind of like the defenders of the forces of Middle-earth that are maybe a little bit more susceptible to avarice, and then the forces that are invading them are trying to bring them back to heal. This is definitely the sort of thing which would probably take place, well, never really, but if it was, it would be after Sauron's defeat, I would imagine. But CARAS SANT, Dorwinion's capital, many of the forces that did not have their capital in the game as a map that you could play on beforehand have had it added in the new patch, and this honestly is probably one of my favourite ones, mechanically and visually, just because of the fact that there are several positions. Even if you lose the outer walls, there are many positions you can fall back to as the defenders and still have good overwatch, which many other fortresses do not have. But also just in general, Dorwinion are always a faction which I do appreciate seeing. They're a little bit peculiar in terms of where they are geographically in Middle-earth. They sort of stick out into the Sauron-dominated lands like a sore thumb, so it's a bit of a wonder they survived as long as they did. But here they are, still standing, and with a very resplendent capital as well. The vineyards, I suppose, well, the vineyards are somewhere else, I would imagine. A little bit of a grey day as well, given the climate that's usually here. But there's actually only one traditionally evil-aligned faction involved in this battle. But to start off with, we will go through the largely human, perhaps entirely human in fact, attacking force today, starting off with Dale, who are one of the forces that could walk relatively easily to Dorwinion down the River Carnan. Hidden is playing as them, and he's also the player who sent me this battle replay, so big thank you to him. Dale, a good faction when it comes to their ability to stay alive and take punishment, good armour, and also in the case of these guys, the Dalian Swordmasters, good melee defence as well, as you would expect from any unit wielding a two-handed sword. They're pretty much what you would expect from a western/northern men kingdom that are closely aligned with the dwarves, really, in terms of how they set themselves up. The Dalian Spearmen are a little bit more typical of what you would expect from a human unit of spears, not overly numerous, but decently defensively able, and not particularly gifted when it comes to their offensive capabilities. You could say that about Dale as a whole, albeit that does get offset when you bring certain units like another of these Dalian Swordmasters that we can see here, the Dalian Spearmen pushing up the Ram. This is one of the flatter edges of the fortress as well that Dale have got to work with, less geographical features on the approach, so they have one of the easier approaches, but that does mean that the defenders are probably likely to bank up with more units as a result. More Dalian Spearmen, and plenty of these regular spears are going to be the first wave, which should at least establish a beachhead with their defensive capabilities. They will need to dig in after that. As soon as they do establish themselves as well, trading back and forth with heavy archers is one of the things that Dale do very well, especially among the human kingdoms, and those are the factions which tend to place a little bit more stock in heavier archers in the first place. Bardian Marksmen being the central unit for that sort of thing, and again, we've seen archers like this before. Their main job is going to be to trade back and forth with other archers, but also they do double as half-decent melee infantry when the need arises, mainly again because of their defensive stats. Something which is a little bit more impressive all round, however, are the Dalian Royal Guard. They are sword and board infantry and melee now. Previously they were a two-hander, but it makes them essentially the big brothers to the Bardian Marksmen just in front of them. Very good defensive archers, very similar in many ways to the Hearthguard of Amon Sul of Cardlan, being a bodyguard tier archer which is more defensive than offensive in nature, albeit with a sword as their weapon rather than a spear. And just in behind we have the River Patrol, this kind of unit, invaluable to many an attacker. Reasonably cheap javelins are always one way in which you can net a good amount of value. In the human kingdoms, at least some of them, do have access to this kind of unit, so utilising them well is going to be key to any sort of victory you would imagine for the attackers. Barding Herd as well, a good unit for establishing a beachhead. In fact, among the human halberdiers, they are probably the strongest purely because of their defensive prowess. They've got thick armour, nice shield value as well, so they make up for some of the weaknesses that halberdiers have while maintaining all of the strengths. They are reasonably expensive, of course, but as far as Dale's infantry go, you will almost always see them because their space can always be cleared for this kind of unit, and bringing a few of them as well, holding down the flanks. And then at the back here we have some Blackshot Dragon Slayers, so an armour-piercing archer. This is the far more aggressive of Dale's two bodyguard archers, which is a rarity, especially in this version of the game with their handheld wind lances. and then 2 Dalian Paladins, so a big investment here, which is probably why they've invested a little bit more into their basic units, despite the fact as the attackers they should have a money advantage in a 4v4. But 2 Dalian Paladins is going to give them a lot of melee punch when it comes to cracking through armour, which is going to be useful, as we will see when we look at some of the defending armies. Marching alongside Dale, kind of a similar faction in terms of some of the things they prioritise at Gondor, commanded by the Warlord. We've got the Vanguard of King Elisar, who have been re-added to the game. This is Gondor's bodyguard shock infantry, which is more finesse-based than the Dalian Paladins we've seen before, wielding a 2-handed sword as opposed to a great mace. So that comes with the pluses and minuses that you would imagine. They're very good when it comes to their overall stats, defensively and offensively, and very good at dealing with less armoured targets, shall we say, but they're still perfectly capable at going toe-to-toe with their fellow bodyguards as well. Very good all-round unit, but expensive, of course. Gondor opting to bring some of their more expensive units by the look of things. The Fountain Guard have long been one of the crutches that Gondor lean upon a lot. They will be leaning on them slightly less in this version of the game, I think, purely because Gondor as a whole have been tweaked so that their mainline infantry is a little bit more useful. And the Fountain Guard are a little bit more aggressive now as well, wielding their 2-handed spear in an aggressive stance. So they are going to be doing their damage more quickly, but they're also a little bit more vulnerable as a result. But still, when you're on the attack like this, that is a trade you would probably take. Standard Gondor infantry with 1 level of armour upgrade. Gondor, with their cheaper armour upgrades in general, you're very likely to see at least 1 level such as this, and with their numbers now, as I already said, they're going to be more useful when it comes to storming a defensive position like this, because they can simply take more of a battering before they become less useful. And there are plenty of them as well, and the extra numbers in comparison to something like the Dalian Spears are going to make the numbers on this side of CARAS SANT significant for the attackers. We've got the Trebuchet as well, manned by Gondor Spears, and obviously the artillery punch is going to be very useful. They could knock some holes in the wall, or they could try and save it for later and do some damage in the choke points. Either idea has its merits. Veterans of Osgiliath, who are a multiple HP archer, also locked morale, very difficult to get rid of from an opposition perspective, especially at long range. It's one of the things which makes Gondor arguably the best skirmishing faction in the game, depending on how they set up. Dale might have something to say about that as well, of course, as well as a couple of Evil Men factions which are not on display today. Citadel Guard here as well, very good in melee, defensive spears with that extra armor-piercing edge, but the fact they now have javelins as well makes them a very good all-round bring. They are expensive, and utilising them with the javelins is a little bit awkward, but at their very best they're even stronger than they used to be, just a higher skill ceiling perhaps for them. And then the more basic Pelagia Marines as well to help back them up. And then also some extra punch with the Axemen of Lasarnak, who do have the full armour upgrades as well, which in terms of giving them that extra boost, it is maybe more useful than the spears and the infantry that we can see in the rest of the army, purely because they have a shield to fall back on, whereas defending skirmishers will almost certainly be wanting to target down an armour-piercing shock infantry unit like this. So giving them that extra armour just gives them that little bit extra breathing room when it comes to dealing with that sort of thing. And there is also another unit back here. The bodyguard has been left behind somewhat. Unsurprisingly, the Nimlothian Honour Guard, very good all-round unit. Bodyguard tier spears with that armour-piercing edge as well. Good all-round. They are still more defensive in nature, even though they do have that armour-piercing. It just makes them slightly more effective at dealing damage against armoured targets, but ultimately they are more defensive than something like the Vanguard of King Elisar, unsurprisingly. Now then, moving on. We have the Vassals of Gondor, Dol Amroth, played by Modexa. Dol Amroth Spearmen, so they've got slightly more numbers actually than the standard Gondor Spearmen. When you upgrade the armour like this, they're every bit as defensively adept as well. But Dol Amroth, as an overall army, you will be spending a little bit more money than Gondor generally. Dol Amroth Men-at-Arms as well, slightly less numbers than the equivalent Gondor infantry. But still very much the same sort of thing, and good shields, especially when you upgrade the armour fully like this as well. They're going to be resilient, and they're going to be have to do, I should say, the same sort of job as the Gondorians we've already seen. Talon Knights, again, more defensive, but with those maces, they do still have armour piercing. Again, all of the armour piercing that the attackers are bringing is for a reason, as we shall see when we look at some of the defenders. Armour piercing for the attackers is going to be very, very useful should they get involved in a bit of a ground war in the streets of CARAS SANT. The Trebuchet of Numenor as well. They've of course got the hammers in melee as well, but they're going to be wanting to use the Trebuchet to its fullest first and foremost. Parathil champions, Dol Amroth, well known for their heavy swordsmen of course, and that extra damage is going to be important, and they also cause fear, although I would doubt the defenders are going to flee for the hills at the first sign of trouble, even when it comes to facing some of Dol Amroth's finest. More Talon Knights are in there as well, so both units have been brought. Here we can see an example of all Dol Amroth's Javelin men in full flow. We've got many units of Belfalas Marines, which is one of the main differences to Dol Amroth as a faction overall, the fact that you can bring so many of these guys. They may be relatively unremarkable, but the sheer volume of javelins, especially in a siege, I would suggest, gives Dol Amroth a completely different dimension that they didn't have before. So I'm not too surprised to see Medexa bring this many of them, and this will be a good acid test for them given the nature of who's on the defence today. Various armour upgrades on these Dol Amroth archers as well, a bit of long range support. There is an opportunity for the attackers to claim some high ground and some fortifications to use their own archers as well. That applies for Dale and Gondor as well. The Arthedain, so some aggressive cavalry. They could be used to devastating effect in this battle, as we've seen with cavalry and sieges, both attackers and defenders before. We'll just have to wait and see if they have the opportunity to do so. And then we have the mighty Haven Guard as well, very similar to the Vanguard of King Elisar of Gondor that we've already seen. Fantastic unit of high-end heavy swordsmen. And finally, the final faction on the attack today is Arthedain. So pretty much all, well, Dale are not a Numenor inheritor, but pretty much all of the heavy hitters when it comes to the armoured up human factions, aside from Cardolan, are on display today. Killeen playing as Arthedain. We've got the High Lords of Illuminus, which are a far more defensive bodyguard unit than the ones that we've seen, well, the shock infantry units that we've seen elsewhere. More similar perhaps to the Nimlothian Honour Guard of Gondor, albeit they're armour-piercing spears. These are non-armour-piercing swords, so that gives you some more damage against some foes and less against others. Very defensively strong, however. The rest of the army, I'd imagine, is going to follow a similar pattern to what we've already seen. Arthedain spearmen with the first level of armour upgrade, those breastplates going to give them that extra defensive edge. Plenty of them as well, by the looks of things, maybe going for slightly more spear focus, which gives them a little bit more defensive nous, but less offensive punch. Illuminous Gate Guards as well at the centre of things, going to inspire the regular rank and file soldiers of Arthedain to remain fighting, and of course they're just very strong pikes in general. I don't know, they may have 2 units of them, so punting for some extra quality in that regard. Plenty of the men-at-arms as well, again with just the first level of armour upgrade, but that will suffice to give them that extra rigidity when it comes to having to march through a sticky situation. Very similar to the men-at-arms that we've seen from Gondor and Dol Amroth. Defenders of Fornost as well, kind of similar to the Parathil champions of Dol Amroth. Individually not quite as strong, but more numerous, so more or less they're going to give you the same sort of results. Good armour, good damage, and again, that extra defensive skill is also going to allow them to stay standing in a prolonged melee for longer. Ram being manned by some Arthedain spearmen. Also got the Grey Company, who are one of very few units to still have body-piercing projectiles, which gives them a huge power spike in certain engagements, but the fact they're horse archers, less numerous and easier to pick off, does mean that you have to be very savvy with how you use them in this kind of situation. We'll see how Killeen gets on. We've got a standard unit of Arthedain marksmen over here as well. Dunedain Cavalry, which is a throwing axe cavalry unit, so that's going to be interesting to see how they get used as well. But throwing cavalry is always the sort of thing which in a siege you're likely to see, because they can still be used as a regular unit, even if they don't zone out enemy cav. And then we've got some standard Arthedain pikemen with the full upgrades over here as well. Now then, moving on to the defenders. And I think starting from this side of the settlement, we will be starting off with the one traditionally evil-aligned faction on the defence today. Cookie Monster is playing as Rhun, and likewise, to be fair, armour piercing for the defenders is also going to be very useful. All of the attackers today are going to be armoured up, and pretty much all of the defenders as well. I mean, there's an element to Dorwinion who are on the defence which aren't so heavily armoured. Rhun maybe less so, but even they, with their scale mail here, are going to be vulnerable to the armour piercing punch of many of the units today. But when it comes to armour piercing, that is Rhune's bread and butter. The flag rim here being one very good example, good defensively, but also good at chucking out some extra damage against their equivalents from many other factions because of the armour piercing. Carmel's Immortals as well. As far as a cheaper unit goes, if it comes to a pure melee fight, they do punch above their weight because of the extra skill that they have from being a dual wielder, but if they do get exposed by the attacking archers today, that could be to their detriment. Crossbows, of course, for the defenders, they're going to be set up in a pretty nasty position, I would imagine, and we know the power of crossbows. If you can utilise them well in a siege, you're well on your way to a victory most of the time, whether attacker or defender. And for the defenders, they are going to need to. I mean, a 4v4 is less of a problem than if you're outnumbered, and it does point to the fact they're probably going to have less quality overall, but you do still need to use this kind of unit to its fullest. more Flagrim. We've also got the Balkoth Sapphire Bladesman, very strong unit of javelins, stronger than any throwing projectile we saw from the attackers, although the Troll Slayers may be present for Arthedain, we don't know because they can hide. Narim, so defending archers, again, if they can be utilised to good effect, that's going to be a good thing for the defenders. Also some Ered Luin units, so there are 2 Dwarven factions on the defence today, which is part of the reason why armour piercing for the attackers is going to be so useful. Guardians of the Blue Mountains, so more javelins. Of course, Ered Luin, very good at skirmishing, very good when they can dig in on the defence. So that will be another good test for them here today, as they have to face off against many attacking forces, which they should be pretty good against if they can get a good position, and Starling playing as them. Juggernauts, very strong in melee. The mix of heavy armour and melee defence from being a dual wielder, as well as the damage of wielding axes, is kind of a perfect trifecta, really. And against many of the attacking forces today, they should be really good. There's relatively few attacking units that can go toe-to-toe with them. There are some. Stuff like the Vanguard of King Elisar can, and the Dalian Paladins armour piercing will be a concern, but again, they will not be alone in pretty much any fight they face. And just in behind them, an ideal supporting unit in many ways in the Gamp Rim from Rhun. Several units of the Gamp Rim over here. The Runic Bodyguard may be less impressive than the Juggernauts at first glance, but the Carmel's Chosen is still a perfectly solid unit in this sort of situation, especially when they get into formation, and also one of the better looking bodyguard units in the game, in my opinion, now that they've been given almost like the sort of sun accents on their armour. Also some extra armour piercing from the Carmel's Shadow Guard. Again, important to use that at the right time. If they do, they will be well on their way to a good result in this kind of battle. More of Starling's units. The Frost Spears can really rack up an impressive kill count if they get consistent volleys off. The Repeaters do good damage, and it's sustained damage as well. There's not really too much of a pause when they start firing, but you do need that sustained damage for them to really get the most out of them. They're also pretty expensive, so you need to get the most out of them, otherwise the value proposition just isn't there. More Juggernauts as well, so unsurprisingly perhaps the Dwarves leaning more into their quality and then bulking out their numbers with some of these Dwarven miners here who are ready to face Dol Amroth's onslaught. Also got some of the Warriors of the Blue Mountains here right in behind the reinforced gates. I mean, the standard rank and file of the Dwarves is well known for its efficiency, even against a force of relative quality like Dol Amroth. Frog the Kamikaze playing as the second Dwarven defender. Erebor maybe a little bit more traditionally Dwarven than Ered Luin with their skirmisher focus. Stuff like the Ironfoot Pikes point to that as well. I mean, when it comes to defending the streets and choke points, going to be a very difficult unit to dislodge, especially considering the shield value that they carry with them. And the Ironfoot Warriors, again, rank and file Dwarves. When you're on the defence like this and have to save a bit of money, this is the kind of unit that you should be dipping into as the Dwarves, because they will hold their own and punch above their, not necessarily their weight class, but their price point is what you would say there. Again, more of the Ironfoot Warriors. Also got some of the Marksmen of Thorin's Halls. I mean, Ered Luin should be really good at trading back and forth with attacking archers, but the amount of heavy skirmishers that all 4 of the attacking human kingdoms can bring today means they'll probably be overwhelmed if it comes down to that, but their defensive position should buy them a little bit of extra in that situation as well. Stonehewers with some armour piercing. We've got some of the Ironfoot Pikes. More Marksmen of Thorin's Halls. Up here, the very scary Sons of Durin. This is exactly the kind of unit the attackers will be hoping to blunt as best they can. And then we've got some Erebor Legionaries here as well, very strong units of line infantry. Just up here on the top as well, Blacklock Engineers, very strong specialist crossbows, probably in terms of damage dealing, the strongest unit of crossbows the game has to offer. I believe that's still the case, but we will see if they can set up a really good firing angle, because that is all important for this kind of unit. Stonehewers are over here. We've got some of the Ironfoot crossbows. Dragon Slayers being a very strong bodyguard armor piercing unit with the shield as well, gives them that extra lift. More Sons of Durin. I mean, Erebor have got a good composition here. I think they've understood the assignment well, and with the skirmisher focus of Ered Luin, mixing and matching should go well. The armor piercing of Rhun as well. And they have come to the aid today, probably with all of their ill-gotten gains, the 3 of them, to take shelter with Dorwinion, played by Lobot. Elvelyn Vanguard, more of a balanced approach, I'd imagine, from Dorwinion, because they do have the finesse of their Elven units, but the Elvelyn are going to be the solid front line which they will need to rely upon. Marksmen as well. Dorwinion no stranger to engaging in a long-range skirmishing fight either, but again, going to have to make use of their fortifications to get the best of that, you would imagine. Infantry already to receive Dale up on the walls, several units of them. They need to be a little bit careful that all of these infantry units don't get exposed by the Gondor trebuchet as it crests the hill. We've also got some more Vanguard over here, ready and waiting, so Dorwinion fully focusing on this side of the settlement, which, like I said, for the attackers has got the most room, so the numbers of the Elvalin along with some of the quality of some of these Erebor units nearby is a good mix, so the defenders are thinking of this, and we've got the Dorwinion River Patrol facing off against the Dalian one, functionally of course identical units. The finesse of course of the elves, Nandor Gladeguard though still very much focused around their damage, big charge on them as well, but not too sure they'll be able to deploy that in this sort of situation, but still Morroquendi Pikes in there as well, good defensive force, and they will need to be in this sort of situation again fighting for the streets. I think the pikes and halberds that the defenders do have are going to be key when it comes to trying to slow the attackers, because the attackers don't have too many. Arthedain have brought a few, but in terms of long weaponry the defenders certainly hold a bit of an edge. More Elvalin infantry, some Morroquendi Pikes as well, making our way back up towards the town centre at the top near the Vintner Lord's Palace. Morroquendi bows who can be committed, high damage archers with poison projectiles, which when dealing with attackers, routing them off towards the tail end of the battle can be the hammer blow that can put them in the ground for good, so we'll see if that plays out. Both bodyguards as well, which we saw used to very good effect by Dorwinion in the very last replay we saw when Dorwinion were defending their western borders. Now we'll see how well they do when they defend their capital. The armour-piercing, slightly more blunt but heavily armoured Hammer Guard, and then the slightly more finesse-based Morroquendi Glade Masters. And there's one more unit to speak about over here, which is the High Thanes of Azagal, which have been very, very good every time we've seen them as Ered Luin. Halberdiers in melee, very strong javelins at range. Arguably, again, they're one of those units of javelins which has to be put into the conversation for strongest in the game, depending on what you're after. I will make a bit of a cut because I don't think the battle is going to get underway immediately. There is going to be a little bit of time before the siege towers make their way into position anyway, but I'd imagine Gondor and Arthedain will want to move into position before Dale and Gondor do begin their assault. So I will begin the battle when the first volleys or blows are being struck upon their enemies. Not as much of a gap as I was expecting actually, but here at the main entrance, or the front entrance I suppose, the trebuchet has been used to clear a hole in the wall, and already Medexa is going to be utilising one of his many units of Belfast Marines to try and soften the enemy up, and really any hits that you can get on some heavily armoured dwarves with such a weapon are going to be well spent. The Ironfoot crossbows scurrying across as well, although I can't imagine. I mean, it's quite rare that we would see a back and forth between javelins and crossbows at this range. Much usually the domain of archers, this sort of thing, but the fire rate of the javelins is going to be significantly higher than the crossbows, albeit the crossbows should be able to relatively easily cut down a few of those marines, but the fire rate here is what's key. We need to get a little bit further away for this to be effective from a crossbow perspective. A decent start this for Dol Amroth. Again, when it comes to pure melee terms, the supporting armour piercing that they do have, albeit no halberds today, so they're not going to have access to maybe the best unit for trying to deal with the Dwarven menace. Meanwhile, Gondor and Dale, their full armies both crashing against this defensive position, so the defenders are going to have to be quite careful, you would suggest, to not allow them to gain any sort of momentum, because if they do, they'll be able to spread throughout the rest of the settlement a little bit more easily than if they achieve an initial breakthrough via the other two angles that they're approaching from. And the walls are completely clear for the time being, so the Dalian spearmen, if they want to, which doesn't look like they are going to, could claim those positions pretty quickly. Meanwhile, Monster, the Dragon's Breath cannon firing away, High Lords Voluminous the target, bouncing projectiles as well, Arthedain marksmen looping their shots over the wall, not going to be doing quite as much damage as the javelins at the front gate, but just trying to put Rhun in a slightly less comfortable position. Was the Dragon's Breath again. I think it hits some of the fortifications just in front of them. Carmel's Immortals, long as they can avoid getting shot up, as we mentioned, they're a pretty efficient unit. I don't know actually how they will. I think the Arthedain Man-at-Arms, especially with the armour upgrade, should be able to outlast them on the wall. But that numbers advantage that Rhun have, and the fact that going up siege towers does mean that you take quite a bit of damage on the initial engagements, maybe could be enough to give them the edge. Amroth, meanwhile, all of their army stacked up very close to the wall, which is a good thing actually, because it means all of their reinforcements are ready and waiting when they are needed. The gate being knocked down as well.
Our men have done well. The gates have fallen.
That's cool. It's rare that you actually see the infantry follow through the gate immediately when it crumbles like that. In almost perfect unison, Dale knocked down the other gate as well. Now obviously Warriors of the Blue Mountains, strong, up close, and that spear malice from the Dol Amroth spearmen means they're not really going to be able to deal too much in the way of damage to most Dwarven infantry. Once again, they're going to be trying to utilise their javelins first and foremost, but the Blue Mountains Dwarves actually counter-attacking a little bit. Again, both of them scrambling for position more than anything else. Not a full commitment yet, both sides trying to engineer the ideal initial engagement. A few more javelins. Meanwhile, Amroth claiming some of the walls as well. Untitled Champions, no less. You need to be a little bit cautious. The Frost Spears are there, and the Champions are definitely the kind of unit that you should want to be targeting down if you can, and here come the repeater shots now. So unsurprisingly, they're going to retreat back down the siege tower. So again, just jostling for now. Meanwhile, Dale taking a few casualties, but they are still pretty much unopposed at the moment. Battle has yet to truly get underway, albeit, well, this isn't going to end too well for the Dalian spearmen. They will at least be able to block the Sons of Durin from getting up on the walls, but not for very long, you would imagine. It's the kind of engagement which definitely favours Erebor. Dale and Erebor having a bit of a falling out here. Again, some of the reinforcements maybe a little bit far away. The Gondorians as well, but based on the pace of how things are going at the moment, it's not too much of a problem. Meanwhile, Arthedain. Another hit trying to go after the densely packed Arthedain spearmen, but missing. As can often be the case with artillery, but Arthedain still not committing to the fight in earnest just yet. So far, it's really only been Dol Amroth here at the front gate that have put the defenders under any sort of sustained pressure. I think that is going to change with Dale and Gondor starting to up the ante a little bit. As soon as that happens, I would imagine Arthedain will follow shortly behind. Javelins, point blank, almost certainly going after the Ironfoot pikes, which, I mean, this is a unit that should concern Dol Amroth based on the composition they've brought, and indeed the Javelins are probably the best bet for a unit that can diffuse them, for lack of a better term. A little bit of a counter-attack here as well from the Ironfoot warriors, but I think they were attempting to go after the Dol Amroth archers, who were firing a few shots in through the gap, but yeah, the Parathil champions will have the better of these basic dwarves. May not be armor piercing, but the damage is still more than enough to deal with the unit that stands before them. Victory seems certain. Still a couple of the champions up here, classic pathfinding of Medieval 2, having a few issues there. Dalian spearmen retreating back up onto the walls, which is completely understandable. Firing over the walls, this is something trebuchets can do in the right circumstances, and trying to go after and hit a couple of these dwarven units over here, the Sons of Durin in particular, of course, are going to be very effective against all the attackers today, so it makes sense they're going after them. Of course, the Gondorians, in comparison to the other Númenórean inheritors, they don't have the trebuchet of Númenor, but also they have 3 trebuchets per unit, so it gives them a little bit more burst damage potential, even if the crew themselves are less effective. Armor-piercing units starting to make their appearance as well. Axemen of Lasarnak. Warriors are down there, but I mean the Axemen of Lasarnak will be happy enough with that engagement. They won't be particularly happy about taking hits from the Ironfoot crossbows, mind you. Ready and waiting. A little bit surprised that there's no skirmishes. I'm also surprised that only one siege tower as of right now has been connected to the walls. Much like Dol Amroth at the other gate. Attacker's going to try and use their javelins, but Alvalin marksman with a good hit down the street. Again, a little bit surprising that some of these spearmen have decided to come down from the walls, because they're immediately going to be given a warm dwarven welcome. Unfortunately for them. Meanwhile, still nothing from Arthedain from an infantry standpoint. Amroth, meanwhile. And all of the attackers, to some extent or another, are wisely trying to use their skirmishers to soften the enemy up a little bit before truly committing forwards in numbers. And then defeat a distinct possibility for the Ironfoots over here as well, still. I'm actually surprised they've managed to last this long, especially now that the overwhelming numbers have also been added in the shape of the men-at-arms. Parathor champions. Fear effect not yet convincing the dwarves to become shaken. The Ironfoot warriors guarding, again, the one siege tower that's in place and actually been utilised. The others are here, but have not yet had any infantry actually utilise them. Are these archers actually firing at? Marksmen of Thorin's halls. And again, this is the sort of situation where the dwarven archers are going to be pretty resilient. That dwarven armour, but not being baited into any sort of back and forth with the Dol Amroth archers just yet. What's going on with the frame rate there? Bardian marksman. Firing directly down at the Ironfoot crossbows now as well, so as soon as I said it, the archers do come up onto the walls and start skirmishing down into them. Axemen of Lasarnak also coming down off the walls and utilising those heavy blows against the Ironfoots. Doing a good job of it as well. This is exactly the sort of engagement they would have been hoping for. The armour upgrades on their part also going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting in this sort of engagement. Crossbows are doing a real number on the Bardian marksman, as you would imagine. Shots coming back down in, but the dwarven armour more than doing its job in that sort of situation as well. Another unit of Axemen of Lasarnak, so going to try and push through with pure infantry, and then maybe, I think Frog can see the writing on the wall, so he's going to have to try and reposition, otherwise those Gondorian Axemen are going to be a real issue. Speaking of a real issue though, Sons of Durin counter-attacking up on the walls, and this isn't going to be a fun engagement for the Dalian spearmen to try and eke out a result in. Still no movement through the gates just yet, albeit another siege tower has now been pushed into place. Dorwinion will have to be the ones to try and throw off any sort of advance there. Front. Spearmen are there, finishing off what remains of the initial dwarven infantry here. There's a fresh unit, but sending them in one by one is not likely to be a good idea for the defenders. Occasional bolt from the crossbows, but not an ideal angle of fire, that. Meanwhile, Arthedain in a couple of places now. As if by magic, the Arthedain men-at-arms now up on the walls, but struggling, surrounded by the Immortals and the Flag Rim. But all of them more or less syncing themselves up, and over on this section of wall, Arthedain are the ones that are surrounding Rhun, so it's a little bit of give and take. These basic units will not enjoy going up against the armour piercing. Meanwhile, managing to come through a gap in the wall here, there are the Dunedain Troll Slayers, which we couldn't see in the composition phase because they can hide anywhere, but they're struggling here. Tribesmen. You can see there the Frost Spears. And this is a good amount of Arthedain's punch that has been committed here. The Frost Spears taking a lot of damage at the hands of the Grey Company, but vice versa is probably a bigger problem for them. And a lot of these basic Arthedain units on the front are also not going to enjoy going up against stuff like Gamp Rim and Shadow Guard. All of that armour piercing being used to very good effect from the men in gold. High Lords of Illuminus are in there, but even they are going to struggle given the odds that they're facing off against. Plenty of supporting units, a few dwarves also joining the fray. We do have more in reserve, some Dunedain Rangers trying to loop their shots, but this is the sort of engagement where if it completely falls apart from an Arthedain perspective, I don't know how much recovery there can be from Killeen. Let's wait and see. Frost Spears able to get those consistent shots. Those Arthedain Spearmen shaken. Routing is likely to be a real problem. Another section of wall does fall, so making use of all their artillery to make these gaps, but I mean, there's going to be no reinforcements for Arthedain on these walls either. I don't think they'll be able to gain any sort of outright victory over here either. A little bit concerning from their perspective. I mean, it looks grim, but that is a result of the Gnar Rim, so the flames are mostly for aesthetic purposes. Arthedain do have their own archers now on the walls, fully upgraded as well with their armour, so in a back and forth, they should be able to beat the Gnar Rim, especially given as the Gnar Rim don't seem to be returning fire just yet. But that's not really the most important thing here. Indeed, the Juggernauts are on the way down now as well, so even in the sections of the wall where Arthedain seem to be winning at the moment, that's probably going to turn around with the arrival of a high-tier Dwarven unit and another unit of Flag Rim. Unfortunately for them. And over here as well, things don't seem to be progressing in the way that they would have liked either. Up until this moment, the attackers were the ones that were slowly gaining a good amount of value across the field, but this engagement has probably flipped it back in favour of the defenders fairly heavily. Stone's throw away, Dol Amroth turning up the heat a little bit, starting to try and put some pressure on the dwarves that are behind the walls, albeit I think this is a bit more of a token effort from the Dol Amroth spearmen than anything. They'll be able to comfortably hold them at bay for the moment, although another unit of Ironfoot warriors being committed outside of the walls. I'm not sure whether these moves have been necessarily the best idea, because it makes it easier for Dol Amroth to gain some efficient engagements, and the Parathor champions have definitely done their job so far, but I guess the threat of all of those Belfalas Marines convinced the dwarves to try and pull this off. Can't really say it's worked out too well for them thus far. Over there, the Arthedain still ready and waiting should the need arise for them to be used. Meanwhile, Dwarven miners are now the ones guarding this wall rather than the Ironfoot warriors, so Dol Amroth fancying their chances and going to commit a unit of men-at-arms to try and put the pressure on. The armour piercing of those pickaxes is still going to be reasonably efficient, but their own defensive shortcomings against consistent pressure will probably tell. Nearby supporting units, I mean, there's not a limitless amount of them. Meanwhile, over here on the front line between Dale, Gondor and the defenders, doing reasonably well so far. Sons of Durin causing the Axemen attack to stop dead in its tracks. Pelagia Marines as well. Meanwhile, units just poking their heads in through the gate. Dalian spearmen ready and waiting. It's the equivalent from Dorwinion as well. Meanwhile, the other gap in the wall, Dorwinion being tested in melee as well, while defending their own capital. The infantry and the pikes, the barding herd, moving forwards.
Our siege towers have reached the wall.
And normally they could be kept at arm's length by the elven pikemen, but it's not quite so simple in this engagement. It's gotten a little bit chaotic. The river patrol poking their heads in as well. Going to try and do some damage from afar. A few javelins raining down. The Elvelin reshuffling themselves. Still that unit of infantry guarding the walls, but you can tell just from the amount of reinforcements, especially over here where there are two attacking armies, they're going to be able to turn up the heat more readily on the defenders, and I think that's probably what Dorwinion are noticing now. That was a fortuitous hit there from the Gondorian trebuchet, managing to hit into what was largely a subsection of the Morroquendi pikes. Exactly the sort of unit they'd be hoping to get rid of. Interestingly enough, a chosen retreat from Dale, though, moving some of their units outside of the walls to maybe reconvene and reorganise. Javelins looping over, and not devastating damage, but hits still being scored. Direct hits now as well. So far, I mean, in terms of territory gained, there's not been a huge amount from the attackers, but as time wears on, they will be hoping to change that. Dol Amroth starting to threaten that, and indeed now moving in. Some stone hewers were committed, but fighting against overwhelming odds here against the men from the south coast. These repeaters firing away, doing a good job at doing damage to those Belfalas Marines who are up on the walls, but not really able to cover all of their bases here, the defenders, and as a result, momentum in Dol Amroth's favour. It's not just the Parathil champions either, but here, taking point, I noticed there were a few of the Talon Knights, and they would be a very good choice for dealing with, especially some of these more basic dwarves. Heavy thud of those maces. Also with a little bit of a wraparound from the Belfalas Marines, and this is the beauty of this unit, and the fact that you can bring a lot of them, is they may not be the strongest melee combatant, but they can at least contribute in a reasonable way to this sort of thing. Actually, to seize a good amount of territory. I mean, there are Erebor legionaries moving in. The marksmen of Thorin's Halls offering their own support as well, but it's not really in the quantities which will force Dol Amroth back at this point, I wouldn't have thought. The real interesting thing will be how the Arthedain get used, because if they manage to get through these defences initially and there's no reorganisation from the defenders, then in broken play, even in the narrow streets, the charges from those lances could be absolutely devastating. Meanwhile, Rhun will be pretty happy with their day's work at the moment. You can see over there Arthedain marksmen and some men-at-arms who are very tired of moving around, but there's not a huge amount of Arthedain's forces left here, and they're not yet ready to reorganise, and indeed they were forced off the walls with the arrival of even more of the reinforcements. So I think the attacks are doing quite well in the other engagements, but it's not gone very well for Arthedain at all. Rhun have to maintain their position though, because Arthedain still have enough to the point where you can't just completely discount them, but if need be, they may need to start siphoning off a few of their resources to assist their allies, and perhaps over here is where that's going to be most necessary, because Dale and Gondor are moving in. More infantry and the Dalian Swordmasters as well. Not exactly in an ideal defensive position, these Elvelin Vanguards. Arrows raining down as well. Dalian Royal Guard. Very difficult to get rid of unless they have any crossbows or something like that nearby, but if not, they're going to be free to do as they please. A lot of Dalian units moving through here as well, and there's not really enough in the way of numbers from Dorwinion over here to maintain this position. It might honestly be time for all of the defenders in general to start thinking about a tactical retreat, because if they don't, they're going to end up losing too many units on the outer walls, and yeah, the Vanguard now routing. And the Gondorians, that means they're going to be free to move forward, intercepting those Ironfoot crossbows. Just as long as those bolts are not raining down anymore, that will be seen as a real victory for the attackers. Momentum surely on their side now. Dol Amroth are also slowly gaining ground. That will probably start to increase in speed as well, as the defenders surely realise now that they're going to have to start moving backwards. I mean, some units like these Vanguards are probably not salvageable. These dwarves certainly are, though. The pikes need to be thinking about leaving. Stone hewers, more of the Gondorians taking up a position on the walls. Still a small fight happening in this corner. Sons of Durin doing very well for themselves. They managed to rack up a hell of a kill count, but the good times are nearly at an end. Dol Amroth. Very much the same sort of thing still happening. The stone hewers are here, and the marksmen being in close proximity is good for them. That sort of support is going to be useful. The Juggernauts have been committed as well. The Javelins being used. Just trying to kill whatever they can in behind the lines. I mean, the Parathil Champions, a decent unit. As we've already mentioned, the Juggernauts, some of the very hardest infantry units in the game to kill. Something of a little more oomph is going to be needed. I don't think they'll want to commit forward the very strongest units that they have just yet. Trebuchet crew in there. Meanwhile, Guardians of the Blue Mountains, what was that? Well, the Dragon's Breath has been wheeling its way over here for quite some time, and that was a pretty damn good hit. What was looking like a reasonably inevitable victory for Dol Amroth may not be so much now, with some of their units routing under the attentions of that cannon and some of the higher quality Ered Luin units present to stand in their way. And the Haven Guard are in here as well. And they will slowly be able to cut their way through, the marksmen now having to get involved in melee also. It's over here, surely. I mean, they're still committing stuff. Dragon Slayer's trackers. The another unit that we didn't actually see in the deployment phase. There we have it. Sons of Durin still doing the thing, so not quite ready to surrender the outer defences just yet.
Holy Father, save us! Our enemy is in control of the city.
But I don't know. I mean, they've committed forward so many of their bodyguard units at this point that this may end up being a battle which is decided entirely on the initial defences, or at least around them. Dragon Slayers moving in, but being point blanked by River Patrol and soon by Citadel Guard as well. There's projectiles of all sorts and from both sides just flying all over the screen now. Gondor infantry chasing the enemy quite far, but just trying to keep any crossbows bottled up, I would imagine. Ironfoot pikes trying to help shore things up as well. The Dalian Swordmasters have been a reasonably effective unit so far, being involved in using that damage, and their defensive nous as well. Yeah, Citadel Guard now in place, just as useful as a melee force in this one. But yeah, 2 units of javelins point blanking you. Even the Dragon Slayers
Only half
with Ered
the enemy
Mithrin
force remains.
are going to struggle under this level of attention. Gondor infantry on the walls. Dalian Paladins have moved forward as well, crunching armor-piercing attacks, which will be very useful against the Elvelin. Dorwinion are probably... Well, they do still have some Elvelin marksmen back here. Dalian Royal Guard perhaps have used up all their ammunition. I mean, they're very, very solid at tanking arrow fire like this. Obviously, there's far more about them in melee than there is to the Elvelin marksmen, so it's not going to be great from from their perspective. They can try and kite, but I don't think it's going to end too well for them if they do. Forward come the marksmen as well, the unit that just ran out of ammunition by the looks of things, being used as the sacrificial lamb. There we have it. Still, their lines are reasonably solid, but I just feel like it's only a matter of time before the attackers make this work. And a third javelin unit helping to deal with the dragon slayers. I mean, the infantry units that are over here are nothing too special, but it's the support that the attackers have put into place that has won them the day there, you would suggest. Again, another sign that maybe they should have retreated there, because stuff like the dragon slayers would have been far better were they able to put them into a good solid defensive position further back. More of the runic units heading across now. And speaking of which, are Arthedain ready to recommence any sort of assault just yet? By the looks of things, still, I mean, the crossbows on Overwatch is a concern for sure. Just biding their time and waiting, Arthedain, because they can still be very useful to their allies.
Lord be merciful, we have lost half of our men.
The Juggernauts, defeat seems certain, only 16 of them remain, but 25 of the Haven Guard as well, so it's probably been less convincing than Dol Amroth would have been hoping for over here. But they have been able to gain ground still. Guardians of the Blue Mountains.
The opportunity for us to regain control of the city has almost vanished.
Weird. The announcer doing his thing again. Guardians of the Blue Mountains, though, just in terms of their solidity and melee, 1-to-1 they will be better than the Belfast Marines, but the Marines do have the numbers advantage here, so they should be able to come out of this one victorious. Still the Trebuchet of Numenor as well, but Dol Amroth don't have too much left in reserve now. A few units of archers looping their shots, some up on the walls, fighting very close to the pikes, but I wouldn't mind too much. They're in a decent enough position and they can stand and shoot. Again, Dol Amroth should win, but it will be a highly Pyrrhic victory. The nature of things when the defenders really do front load in these sorts of battles is that you tend to have to just sort of empty the tank and hope for the best. You get 55 men-at-arms rejoining the fray as well. Imrahil himself involved in this engagement. Don't know whereabouts the Ered Luin general is. To keep an eye out. But it's still Gondor and Dale. Well, I mean, this is also a concern now for the, as I mentioned, when things get in broken play, when there's a little bit of room to roam, the Arthedain can now charge around and any isolated target can be charged into oblivion. We already know how effective the Arthedain can be. Arguably the best unit of lancers that the game has to offer. Going to go and support their own army for the time being though. I think that's probably just fine. I think Gondor and Dale are in a position where they can take care of business on their own. Stonehewers kind of surrounded. Gimli is a Saracen. Well, that's the Erebor general anyway. I mean, dwarves don't tend to suffer under morale conditions. If they do, it's a sign that the battle has already largely gotten away from them. Yeah, as part of the Blacklock Engineers and the Dragon Slayers that were there. Vanguard of King Elisar finishing him off. And the Gondorian artillery now also in place as well. Dale, all of what remains of Gondor and Dale now entering the settlement. Which again, it's not a limitless supply of units, but Gondor still, with the hammer blow of their Fountain Guard and Nimlothians, means that they do still have another gear to go to, and the Dalians also in a good position. Heading up towards the town centre, taking the direct route, and Dorwinion having to scrape together what units they can to stop this sort of progress. Bardian marksmen firing at point blank, probably targeting down the Morroquendi pike, so we are going to see more of the settlement utilised, and necessity, defenders being forced back not of their own volition. When that happens, that's usually a good sign for the attackers. It's just whether or not Gondor and Dale in a pretty healthy position, both of them, still with a good amount of strength to them that they can call upon. Gondor moving forwards as well, and the defenders now consolidating around the town centre. It's whether or not Dol Amroth and Arthedain have got a significant amount of strength that they can still lend to these engagements. Marchman of Thupman's Halls, I mean, the scraps of units that were left behind do need dealing with. Need to make sure that the defenders are as weak as possible going into the final stages. Amroth doing their thing. Guardians of the Blue Mountains still there as well. Then Arthedain now moving forward, but that's because Rhun have had to retreat many of their units, the Dol Amroth cavalry moving in as well. Again, it's not a huge army that Arthedain still have left, but something like the Annuminous Gate Guards is still a very significant unit to have, given the fact that there wasn't really anything in terms of pikes that any of their allies brought to the table, so in the late game they could be a very important unit indeed.
Only half the enemy force remains.
Flagrum now routing off. And not the most important units anyway. Dunedain Cavalry still there again. Some units that got left behind, you want to be killing them off, even if it is just a unit of Balkoth tribesmen that are out of javelins. Making sure that there are as few numbers to deal with in the late game as you push up to the palace on the hill. That's going to be vital. Still the small matter of attacking artillery as well. Rhun managing to retreat several units. Guardians of the Blue Mountains and Frost Spears, as Gondor fall upon the purple and gold front line which is now formed. And just trying to hold back the tide really, as many of these other units need to retreat. The Arthedain nearby, but I don't know if you're going to really be able to charge in and kill off many of these units now. Still a good amount of strength for the defenders as well. Rhun perhaps central to their efforts at this point, as well as the high-end units from Dorwinion. So it is the human defenders mainly. There's a few elements of dwarven quality still there. Barding Herd and Bardian Marksmen, Dalian Swordmasters moving in there as well. And it's the Barding Herd mainly which are going to make this engagement an impossibility to win for the Alvelin infantry. Unfortunately for them, plenty of reinforcements as well. Good positioning as well from these Blackshot Dragon Slayers, managing to thread the needle, and the Hammer Guard definitely the sort of unit that you want to be dealing with again. All of the attackers, as we mentioned several times, armour is a massive part of their identity. The Hammer Guard, perfect for dealing with such things. Way over, almost hitting some of the boats in the river. Actually, CARAS SANT is on the... this would be outwards, you would be getting onto the Sea of Rhun. Interestingly enough. Could be trying to snipe out the Dragon's Breath, which has been a decent factor in this battle already. Vanguard of King Elisar living up to their name in the Vanguard as well. Leading from the front, and the Fountain Guard in close proximity as well. Okay, they haven't really been able to retreat their units as quickly as they would have liked, I think, the defenders. Arthedain and some more of these units as well, Shadow Guard. Too many of these slightly more damaged units have been picked off by the attackers, all of which will be useful moving forwards. Dunedain Cavalry wasn't really so much for charge, but it will do. So the Vanguard pushing all the way through, and they're certainly not shy about advancing now. Gondor very keen to try and engage wherever they can. Dunedain cavalry charging in, but getting a couple of kills, but nothing too devastating for the Juggernauts. King Alisar actually doing well against the Juggernauts so far as well, but have a slight numbers advantage. It's always hard in a real battle situation like this to judge which way an engagement is going to go. Nothing on a guard moving in, trying to go around. I mean, they have managed to break up the formation of the Gamperim a little bit. If they're on their own though, the Halberdiers should be able to reorganise themselves. They may need the assistance of those on-rushing axemen. Gondor taking the lead on the front two ways up to the palace courtyard. Dale taking the long way around via the docks, and then presumably Dol Amroth and Arthedain will support as and where they can. Arthedain will probably follow their sister kingdom through these two entrances at the front. You've seen the Dunedain cavalry flitting about. Still the thud of artillery. And threading the needle, you'd have to be quite fortunate to get a really devastating hit, whether you're the defenders or the attackers in this sort of situation. And you do risk hitting your own units from both sides as well, so we'll have to keep an eye on that, see how that situation develops. Vanguard's still comfortable. I say that, it says victory and then defeat and then evenly matched, and I think it coincides with when they're getting hit with the crossbow bolts. In come the Dunedain Rangers, surrounding the Juggernauts. And again, that melee defense, when you surround a unit, that is how you can deal with that. For pikes and Gamperin, but the formation is not ideally constructed. A very battered heavy swordsman from Dol Amroth also moving in, so it's just Dale that are going to be attacking via the docks. Everyone else is going to be throwing their weight behind, trying to move up the hills in the front. That was the Dragon's Breath. Getting a reasonably direct hit. More Fountain Guard moving up the hill. Veterans of Osgiliath can position themselves nicely. They are going to need more reinforcements because the initial infantry units they've sent in are not having the best of time against the runic maceman. Sort of progress a Dale making. Well, they have managed to force their way through that gatehouse that the Alvalin infantry were manning previously, but Dorwinion still standing in the way of any further advance. Daily and Royal Guard are in here. So too are the Hammer Guard, having taken a bit of damage at the hands of the Black Shots. Again, a little bit of a chaotic engagement this, which is not ideal from a defending standpoint. Approaching the final 10k frames, and well, it's still an even battle, that is for sure. Morale may yet play its part in this one as well. The attackers are going to need to look after that a little bit, because the price for them falling apart mentally is going to be higher than it is for the defenders. But when you've got units like the Black Shots and the Paladins moving forward, you know that you're going to be in mentally a pretty decent place as Dale. Also a unit Citadel Guard from Gondor assisting. But they won't be too pleased about the fact that they've been landed in a straight up melee with the Hammer Guard. Keep an eye on that. Alien Royal Guard still moving forward, and they've been involved in this fighting for quite a while at this point, and there's still 25 of them remaining, 24, but it does go to show how hardy of a unit they are. A Valid marksman attacking from the side. Again, maybe a little bit of impatience here from Dale. They don't have to move forward quite so aggressively. I mean, they're trying to stop the crossbows, but they don't need to do so with all of their units. They've got 2 units of Paladins as well, which that level of armour-piercing quality going into the latter stages here is going to be tricky for the defenders to deal with. Meanwhile, attacking artillery now also having its effect on the front line, and that is enough to rout the Flag Rim. So again, a little bit of an unfortunate situation. for the defenders, because now they're going to have to reorganise. Going to have to place more units in the entranceways to these courtyards. I don't know if they necessarily have the numbers to do this wholesale anymore. Got the Nar Rim in that walkway overhead. It's an ideal firing position. It's just whether or not one unit of Nar Rim possesses the necessary firepower to turn the tide here. I don't know if the High Thanes of Azadal use their javelins. I mean, they would have had to have done so pretty quickly, but we have also seen them be absolutely vicious in a up-close and personal melee engagement. So,
The enemy general is slain. Betray his death will break his men's resolve.
well, it could. Carmel's chosen.
Wise dead.
There goes Imrahil as well, so actually the Gondorian general was right next to him when that happened. Everyone's general is starting to drop like flies. Defeat seems certain. There goes another general. Those High Thanes ripping through the Gondorian and Dol Amroth generals. I mean, they're isolated, which is a little bit of a shame, because if they were central to a defensive position, they would be extremely potent, but one problem they may have is the range on the numerous gate guards might prove to be a problem if the gate guards can sort their formation out, but it doesn't look like they're too interested in doing that for the time being. And the Sapphire Bladesmen and the Carmel's Chosen doing a good job at holding on from the front as well. Troll Slayers wielding their spears aggressively. Small matter of arm-piercing projectiles coming in from the Wardens of the North as well. Might be just as useful as a melee combatant later on. And the elements of quality that both sides have, the good hits that both sides are scoring on one another as well. I just think the attackers can sustain this sort of thing for a bit longer than the defenders can. I'm trying to push the Dragon's Breath cannon back, but I don't think they're going to be able to do that. So that's going to be the end of the defending artillery. Fountain Guard managing to prevent any sort of salvaging of that artillery piece. The crew themselves, well, actually they're still moving the artillery back. I don't know necessarily whether they're going to be able to utilise it. I mean, they'll have to put it over near the town centre, I guess, and start trying to loop their shots in. But the problem is, if the attackers move into the more open areas here, it's going to be difficult for the defenders to turn them back once that happens. As the Gondorians surge forth. Arthedain and the veterans of Osgiliath down there. Blackshot Dragon Slayer's in a good position. I mean, the attackers moving in the right direction across pretty much every front. The defenders, you do get the sense that they're running out of options. Forcing Dale back down the hill. I mean, the Morroquendi Blade Master is probably the single scariest unit they have, based on the fact that it's still completely healthy and the High Thanes are cut off at the moment. Vanguard King Elisar charging through a gap, managing to engage the crossbowmen, preventing any bolts from heading their way. The Arthedain managing to get into open ground as well. Thud of the repeaters, managing to kill one of the riders on the advance. That wasn't really a particularly good charge either. Surely with Arthedain doing as they please, that's a terrible sign. Morroquendi bows firing away as well with their poison projectiles. Can they affect some sort of route? I mean, these High Thanes, like, every engagement we've seen them in, they've just, I mean, the runic high tier units as well have managed to fight their way alongside the High Thanes now as well, so this may actually be a defender victory, this engagement here, but the problem is now that they've committed to it, they need to completely finish off all of the attackers that are here. The Wardens of the North being here and Trebuchet crews means that it's not going to be a quick matter. By the time they do, will the attackers have won in other areas? I mean, we've got more spearmen routing. Strong crossbowmen pursuing them, but surely will be cut down by the Arthedain. Problem is, like, routing all of these units is going to be difficult just because the Fountain Guard, you're going to need to do something pretty special to cause them to flee. And That's the main bulk of what the Gondorian units are up here. Of course, the vanguard, as battered and bruised as they are, will fight to the bitter end. And then there's the Dalians as well. 2 units of Dalian paladins, albeit 120 Glade Masters reasonably well situated to deal with most of what Dale have. And it's just a case of whether it's a very delicate balance for the defenders at this point. If they can keep themselves as healthy as they can in this middle engagement here, High Thanes and the Carmel's Chosen, if they're victorious, they could then turn around and maybe save the day. Still a small matter as well of the fact that they do still have a few ranged units that can offer their support. Flagrim, who did return from routing, and are now going after the Fountain Guard. I mean, one thing that you would say is that there's only 10 of the Dragon's Breath crew left. If they can get the artillery in place, one well-placed shot could be enough to turn the battle well and truly in their favour. We'll have to wait and see. Still some of the repeaters alive. Veterans of Osgiliath also, however, again another unit that you simply cannot rout, so the defenders need to make sure that you have enough strength left to be outright victorious against them. Dragon Slayer's trackers still alive as well. They managed to escape where the regular Dragon Slayers and most of the other Erebor units could not when Gondor and Dale smashed through the outer defences. Having access to them now, though, might be a real match-turning thing. Marquendi Bows in a good position as well, firing directly into the Dalians. The Blackshot Dragon Slayers having to force their way through. They might need to, because I know that Dale, they still have 18, so yeah, both units of Dalian Paladins are in, so Dale I think have committed pretty much everything they have, trying to force their way through, and yeah, they can't afford to keep taking crossbow shots and elven arrows, but again, they can't really turn their back on the Glade Masters either, because otherwise they'll get butchered. Defenders, that is a good shot to have late on, right through the Sapphire Bladesmen. Gondor infantry, 182 of them, arriving as well, but I mean, there's still 58 of the High Thanes, and they've been fighting against, well, in a difficult position and against good quality units for a while.
Good news! The enemy is no longer in command of the city.
And these Wolves of the North struggling.
Holy Father, save us! Our enemy is in control of the city.
Of all the announcers, this is the one that probably loves the sound of his own voice the most. I think it's the Byzantine one from Standard Medieval 2. Carmel's Chosen taking a more aggressive approach, I think trying to go after the trebuchet, but
Praise the Holy Lord.
in many
In
many ways. Oh my god, please be quiet. There is a way of getting rid of the announcer voices, which I should really do. I'm doing this for years and I still haven't done it. I guess it's because when these sorts of situations are somewhat rare, so I keep forgetting about it.
Curses! Our enemy has command of the city.
I think it's because the cavalry keeps charging in and out of the town centre. Daily paladins have managed to climb up here. I mean, it's a very chaotic fight at this point, very broken up. One thing I will say from an attacking perspective is they need to try and secure these locations fairly quickly before the High Thanes turn around, although there goes the Runic General, Carmel's Chosen, point blank, but hitting their own units as well, causing their depleted flag run to rout. Again, not the most important thing, but it's also not a total victory as a result of that. Marquendi Bows firing away. I think, yeah, the Glade Masters, only 8 of them remain. The Dorwinion General falls as well. The Vintner Lord in the shadow of his own palace. Sapphire Bladesman doing nicely. Arthedain Paladin's going to be overwhelmed back here, especially with arrow fire coming their way. The Dragon Slayer's tracker's still healthy enough. Honestly, I don't think the attackers are going to have enough in the tank. I think it's going to heavily depend on what happens down here, but Trebuchet crew, Gondor infantry, have managed to finish off the Carmel's Chosen. And they scramble up the hill. They need to try and surround and do something about the High Thanes that way, because they've been fighting them from the front pretty much the whole time, and as a result they have been domineering in their melee engagements. Managing to get their frost spears as well into a nice position. The Warlord doing a good thing here as well though, seeing that this is the case, he's going to burrow into the Gnar Rim, which increases the likelihood of friendly fire, and also you don't have to worry about the veterans of Osgiliath routing in the same way that other units might. So you can do that without the fear that you've scuppered yourself. Buckshot Dragon Slayers. Alien General still alive, but you wonder how long that's going to last for with the Sapphire Bladesmen arriving on scene. Still more Aquendi bows over here, the Dragon Slayer trackers. Again, wielding their axes like spears. The Dalian Paladins, even having 2 units of them was not enough. I mean, for a long time in this fight, both Dale and Gondor were making steady, solid progress. And there goes the Dalian General. But in the end, not able to sustain it. Dol Amroth and Arthedain not having enough to really be an extremely important factor going into the latter stages. And the Arthedain charging around behind enemy lines, that was a moment where I thought, the defenders are in quite a bit of trouble here. And yet, no. And this is looking like yet another defender victory. Lion's share, the overwhelming amount of results that we've seen in this new patch in siege battles have been defender victories. High Thanes now getting surrounded, but probably too little too late. The Trebuchet of Numenor crew already fairly depleted. Those hammers will have a good armor piercing effect, then you can see a couple of the High Thanes already finishing off. Man, this announcer really is something else, ain't he? And I think that's pretty much it. There's nothing left of the attackers on the high ground except for those 2 veterans of Osgiliath who will fight to the last man, but ultimately overwhelmed and overrun. The Gnar Rim will finish them off. And yeah. The Vintner Lord may be dead, but a new one will surely take his place. And business will continue. Crossbows helping out. The veterans of Osgiliath very good defensively. It's going to be it for him, but Frost Spears, good use of these walkways as well in the final stages. There is another area in the middle of the settlement you can use that when it's a little bit more exposed, so I can understand why the defenders didn't retreat to there, perhaps. High Thanes. The Arthedainian General, it is. He is the last one remaining. And as with many other units, he's going to meet his end at the hands of the High Thanes by the looks of it. Or at least he's managing to kill off a couple of them. A bit of irony to the fact that Arthedain might be the last attacker left standing, considering the beating they took earlier on, and maybe in those sorts of engagements with how effective that was from the defenders, Rhun with a bit of support, really dusting most of Arthedain's army. Maybe proportionally that was a far more significant series of events than it seemed at the time. Trebuchet crew fleeing. He's managing to kill off a couple of others. They still have ammunition as well. Yeah, definitely a lot of pluses and minuses, I think, for both sides in this game. Because the attackers did a lot of things right, so did the defenders. And it's one of those where you can't really make too many sweeping statements, because it's... Well, there he goes. Victory for the defenders yet again. CARAS SANT defended successfully by Dorwinion and their allies. But yeah, as I was saying, I think it's one of those situations where the battle is... There is a lot of individual events that were happening, and the attackers did very well in some of them, the defenders did very well in others, and I guess like on the balance of things, just about the defenders came out on top there, and a lot of it was based on the quality they still had remaining to them in the late game there. The High Thanes obviously very, very effective, and you can see from the amount of kills, obviously Ered, Luin, when they're on the defence in a siege and they can get themselves situated, they are a very effective faction. That is where they are at their most comfortable. Among the dwarves, they may lack a little bit in terms of infantry punch compared to Erebor and Khazad-dûm, who weren't present. But the supporting units that they have means that they can be extremely damaging when they're on the defence like this, and I think that's what we saw here. Also, Rhun did very well against Arthedain. Arthedain, tried to attack all at once, but it was interesting how you go around the settlement. On the Dale and Gondor side, you had two armies in one location. It was a fairly wide location, but two armies in one location. Dol Amroth, you had one army in one location, and then Arthedain, because they were going through that breach in the wall as well as along the larger wall, you had one army in two locations, and I think that split focus was probably where Arthedain came unstuck a little bit, and it's probably why Rhun were able to pick them apart with a little bit of support from Ered Luin there. But yeah, I think the right outcome of this battle was ultimately reached. I think it was very competitive though, which is good to see. Also, it's always nice when the battle is won by the team that the player who sent it in was not on, because it sort of beats the allegations that players only send in battles that they were the winners in. Let's see what did the damage for Dale though, hidden of course the player who did send it in. Dalian Royal Guard were impressive, honestly. They were involved pretty early on. They got up on the walls and started shooting down into the Dwarven and Dorwinion defence, and then they got involved in melee as well, and they were alive for quite a while. It was only towards the end where they petered out, and the Paladins took up the mantle, but they weren't really as effective as they could have been, and perhaps should have been, with the amount of damage they can chuck out. But then that is also a testament to how well the defenders were able to contain such units. The Black Shots did decently. A lot of those kills would have been on stuff like the Hammer Guard and other such units. Barding Herd, mixed performances from them, but again, most of the time Dale were moving forward with the wind in their sails. It wasn't a slow engagement where the phalanx of the Barding Herd was truly necessary. Swordmasters did okay, and the Dalian Spearmen again. 201 is good, 47 not so much, and then everything in between, but they were a workhorse kind of unit in the early stages, certainly. So yeah, big thank you to Hidden for sending this one in. Big thank you as well to all the players for being a part of this battle again. Another high quality one. We've seen quite a lot of good replays as the new patch has been released. And again, a lot of these were sent to me within the first couple of weeks. It's just a case of working my way through and doing them in series. Obviously a little bit of a weird theme on this one, but it does still kind of make a certain amount of sense. Obviously the powers that be in terms of the human-led world in the absence of Sauron, and then maybe the others, the dwarves and some of the, I wouldn't call them greedy necessarily, but you can certainly see where Dorwinion and Rhun could fall into the same sort of traps as the dwarves, I guess. And now they're free to do as they please. The new era, I guess, in this little alternate dimension. So yeah, as far as what's going to be coming up next in terms of a replay, I'm not sure. I'll have to look. I did get sent one very early on that was on Rivendell. I just don't know whether it's got the sufficient number of players to actually make Rivendell a good battle to watch, because I think there's only 5 players, but Rivendell's quite a big map, so traditionally it needs the full 8 like a battle like this. So we'll see. It could be that one. Otherwise there are a few others as well on custom maps that I'll be looking at doing as well. And obviously the faction overviews will continue as they have done, and they will. I don't know the exact. If I do one a week, I don't know exactly when it'll end, but it'll be toward the tail end of the year. So again, we'll see where we stand after that. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.